And the winner for the Wisconsin Podcast Choice Award for Favorite Podcast of the Year goes to Black Like Me. Black Like Me. Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, Black Like Me listeners. Hey, a couple of things. One, our new intro is the jam. I hope that you like that. If you're a new listener, you don't know that that's a new opening. But if you're an old listener, hopefully you're thinking like me, snap. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I'm singing the vocals. I'm harmonizing with my cousin Marcus. But I thought for season 5, I would just slide a little something in. So play it again and let me know if you can hear my voice in there. Hey, this episode that we're about to play is our real official. It's my first real discussion with someone else. You know, I had my little rant last week, mic check. But this one I'm talking with psychologist Dr. Chris Bass. And, you know, I just want to say the CDC just came out with a study that said because of the stress of 2020 and what Americans have witnessed on television and the stress of the pandemic has shortened the lifespan of Americans. It's dropped to like a 16-year low. But listen, it dropped even lower for Black and brown people. So listen, I didn't catch COVID. I didn't die from it. No one put their knee on my neck. I wasn't shot while out running. I can avoid all of those pitfalls that cut Black lives short immediately by just watching it, participating in it, watching the riots and the protests and being inundated with that information. That stress has now shortened my life expectancy. What the hell? So when we talk about systemic realities, systemic racism, microaggressions, y'all, I want you to know this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about. So in this episode, I'm talking with Dr. Bass about the role that stress plays in the lives of Black people who are just trying to do the right thing and what we can do to stay healthy in all of this. You're going to enjoy season 5. You're going to enjoy this episode. And I know you already have enjoyed our new opening. Listen to this and let me know what you think. A lot has happened since our break from season 4, and we're asking the question all season long for season 5, now what? You know, we have all these new things, a vaccine, a new president, so many new things that are happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is back to normal. And I'm just asking the question, now what? What are we seeing? What's going to happen? What do we need to do differently? How do we move from here? I want to have people talk about that from different perspectives. And so today, my guest is here for some selfish reasons. One, he is a good brother. He's a brilliant brother. He's a fraternity brother. His name is Dr. Chris Bass. He has been a psychologist for 20 years, for 2 decades. I met him when he was actually in his doctoral program here in Madison. I was actually his pastor in another life. And he serves as an associate professor at Clark University in psychology, but also a contributing professor at Walden University in forensic psychology. That sounds interesting. We might have to get into a little bit of that. And so I want to just talk to him about what he's seeing as a psychologist, as a counselor, in terms of the impact of stress on Black men in particular during all of this stuff, COVID, quarantining, wondering about the vaccination, processing the Tuskegee experiments, all of those things. And then I'm going to get on my sofa a little bit. Y'all can't see me, but I'm on my sofa. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions because I've got some stress that's going on. And so I'm going to take advantage of this friendship and just ask a couple of questions. So you all will probably get a chance to hear him at work a little bit and hear me in pain a little bit as we just talk about what's going on in this world of ours. Dr. Chris Bass, frat, man, welcome back to Black Like Me. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Blessed and highly favored is what they used to say back in the church days.
Yeah, you look like it. I'm looking at you. You're looking like you blessed and highly favored.
Thank you, man. I mean, in the Jewish tradition, they would call their master teachers Rabboni.
Oh, come on.
So I have to challenge you. What you said in a former life, you were my pastor. So I have to challenge you because from that day to this day and beyond, you will always be my Rabboni.
Oh,
you will always be the master teacher. So I'll bring my stool up to you so that I can learn from the great one.
Man,
So
listen,
I
that's
thank you for offering me this platform and this opportunity to speak with you.
well, listen, I appreciate it so much. So listen, you pull up your stool, I'll pull up my couch, and we'll we'll help each other get through this mess. When Dr. Bass is not taking care of other families, he has a beautiful wife. She was in medical school while he was in his doctoral program here. We knew each other before we were dads.
That's true.
Our daughters, like Jackie and I, only have one child, but Chris and Roz's first child was born the same week, I think, as ours. And so just going through that, new parenting phase. And man, that's been almost 25 years, as our daughter's about to turn 25 years old.
Yes.
And I just appreciate the friendship, man. So listen, I hope that I can, from time to time, Chris, invite you in sort of like a Black Like Me correspondent, because I'd like to bring new guests in, but there are a few folks who are perhaps judges or psychologists or writers who have unique perspectives. And so from time to time, I want my listeners to get used to their trusted voices. So I hope that, from time to time, throughout the season or next season, I'd love just to have you come back, particularly when new traumatizing thing takes place, so we can talk about it, sir.
Absolutely.
Yes. So Dr. Bass, we've been quarantined for almost a year.
Yes.
Yeah, my last flight, my last trip was in March. I went out to New Jersey to visit a buddy of mine for his birthday. And then everything shut down. I thought this was going to be 2 weeks, maybe 3 at the tops. So, we're quarantined, we're inside. COVID is scaring folks. And so we're dealing with that. Then all of a sudden, George Floyd happens. We hear about Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. So much stuff is going on. I was Zoom bombed last fall. I don't know if we talked about that or not. And but a guy just called me the N-word, typed it out about 250 times, said all N-words should die. And man, like 3 weeks after that, I dreamed that I was in an alley. I was looking down the alley. This guy was under a light, almost like an old black and white, detective movie. And I had super hearing in this dream. And so this guy actually had a clipboard, like it was a manifest, like he was, like he was looking at inventory's going to drop off. So he flipped the page and he says out loud, okay, next on my hit list is Alexander G. So he didn't say it like he knew me. It wasn't like, oh yeah, G, we're going to get him. It's almost like, this is my work today. I'm just trying to figure out where I'm dropping stuff off. And I woke up after that and I said, I might have had dreams where I was fighting, or maybe I was being chased by someone, but I've never had a dream where someone's reading my name off a hit list, like they were coming for me. And I just said, is the pressure of all of this stuff and what I'm watching on television and what I'm experiencing in quarantining, am I thinking I'm okay just because I can get up and go to work and I can preach? Am I not paying attention? Are my dreams talking to me? So I guess I'll just start from there. How usual or unusual is it to dream about something like that when you've been watching? So when I've been watching the murder of so many Black people, is that odd that I would dream like that?
No, actually, that's a consistent and present dream experience that most people experience when they suffer from what we call secondary traumatic experiences. So we have, of course, post-traumatic stress disorder that most people are familiar with now because it's become very popularized in the media. But nobody is really talking about the secondary trauma or secondary stress experience. Now, what you experienced or what you described is something that we typically see when people are taking their stress levels with them when they go to sleep. And what you're doing is you're playing out the stresses that you had in the daytime in your nighttime unconscious states. So now this can be very dangerous because it becomes very symbolic. The images become very, very symbolic. And what I mean by that is that person that you saw or heard checking off the list, that could have been you, wondering if you were going to survive this whole COVID experience. How are you going to survive the unknown? So as you think about it, as you process your inability to control what was next, then now we're starting to see people dying from this thing. So
Right.
you
Right.
probably thought somewhere in that alive or awake experience or conscious experience that, okay, maybe I will be next. And therefore you're checking yourself out in your dreams. But very common.
Tag. Man, after that Zoom bombing experience, um, you don't know whether that person's local or not. I was training white allies to be supportive of our justified anger program, and so I didn't know if they had come in through, if they had registered to actually be there to disrupt it. I didn't know if they're from Madison and just jumped in, if they're national, if they're watching me. But I remember doing Facebook Live that evening afterwards, and people were texting me saying, "Gee, we can see your address." And what? And when I've done Facebook Lives in the past, I've never wondered about whether or not you're doing that. So I turned around to the street. Someone else wrote me and said, "We can see the park behind you, so it's easy to know where your house is." And then I had friends call me and say, "Hey, listen, if you need security, um, um, we can help you with that." Someone who I see from I got some lower back problems, used to be Kamala Harris's bodyguard when she was running for president. So he's like, "Look, dude, if you need me, if you need some help." So I go from just training nice white people being called an N-word by a mean white person, then I'm dreaming that I'm on some list. And so I think that even on top of the fears about checking out with COVID, to all of a sudden being asked questions like, "Do I need detail?" Like I'm not a political figure. Like I've never imagined that I would need to be talking to detail. So you happen to bring some clarity, man, because I don't think I feel like I take those discussions in stride, but don't really process the cost and the weightiness of that kind of stress,
Mhm.
man.
Well, here's the thing, Doc. When it comes to stress and anxiety, most of us believe, to your point, that if we wake up every day and still have the ability to get that cup of coffee in the morning and carry out my day-to-day activities, that stress, that underlying stress and anxiety doesn't still sit on our shoulders.
Wow.
So what I encourage everyone to do is to begin to write a journal. Begin to write things down. If you don't already have a journal, let that be your homework assignment for yourself today,
Okay.
because there's a lot of things that we are triggered by that we don't even know that we're
Sure.
triggered by.
Sure.
So it's important to, as I say, live outside of yourself. Get out of your own head. There's more room on the outside than on the inside. So
Mm,
you begin to write down all of the things that you think about, all of the experiences that have some type of importance or significance in your day, right?
mhm.
And I know we're not at the segment yet where we talk about what to do, but I
Sure.
have to throw this in here.
Please go ahead.
You have to begin to create a routine for yourself,
Mm,
because all anxiety is the inability to control or predict what's next. As human beings, we have a need to control things. And when we
gotcha.
can't predict it and when we can't control it, what we typically experience is this physiological state that we have labeled anxiety. Okay.
Mhm.
So, how can I control it? The way that I can control it is I can begin to have a routine that I look forward to every evening and every morning.
Wow.
So you keep a little notebook next to your bed and you write down your thoughts before you go to sleep so you won't take those thoughts into your unconscious state. And then what you do is you write down your dreams and your thoughts in the morning so that you won't have to suffer with those ideas and thoughts for the rest of your day. So it has to be intentional. It
Mhm.
has to be something that you practice daily. Also, one thing that has rarely been discussed when looking at 2020, Dr. G, is the flood of constant imagery
Yeah.
that we had to see and we had to be dealing with
Mhm.
during these
We were just
times.
inundated with it.
Inundated with the images over and over, especially as it pertained to George Floyd. So many images came in through the TV, and
Sure.
because we have a need to know, what typically happened is we watched that image, even though it was the same image, over and over and over and over, different angles, different stories, different narratives, over and over and over. But what we didn't realize is, in our need to make sense of that, we begin to put ourselves in that same state.
Wow.
We put ourselves under the knee of that officer. And that person, if it wasn't us, it became a relative of ours.
Definitely.
We felt for him and his family.
Because, Dr. Bass, I'm older than you are, a couple years older than you are, but I remember my parents and grandparents talking about Emmett Till, because again, he was from Chicago and I lived there until I was 5 or 6. But because he was from there, he was like everybody's second cousin. Like he was my beautician's niece's fiance's cousin. Like there was 6 degrees of separation.
Mm-hmm.
That trauma impacted people because that was their 13-year-old son. That was their grandson. And so this is making sense. I'm curious. How are white people responding? I know this is real general, but we could just process this. How are they responding? Those who consider themselves woke or in touch to these images, because I identify with George Floyd, but I don't identify with Officer Darren, whatever his name was. My white friends who called me to say, I'm so sorry about what happened, did not identify with the officer as a white male. And my white female friends did not identify with Amy Cooper, who was the woman with the dog in the Central
Bird
Park.
watching.
Right. Bird watching.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see it, even though, I'm not George, I don't live in Minneapolis, but we do make this connection. Like we hear that there's a murder, there's a shooting, hold our breath. Was it a black person who robbed the bank? Because we do feel this sense of, it's part of our worldview, this sense of connection.
Right.
But I'm wondering, then does that make us more prone to stress that perhaps our white colleagues don't, because they can watch that and feel sorrow for George Floyd and his family, but don't feel any level of identification with that police officer. So do they escape sort of that level of stress that we may be feeling?
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head when you talked about worldview. For us, our worldview from an Afrocentric or an Eastern perspective, it's more inclusive. It's more family dominated. It's not about me, it's about we.
Right.
So now when you compare that or juxtapose it with the Western worldview, the Western worldview says that I need to get mine. It's about me. So if something out there happens, I can disassociate myself from other people who may look like me, because again, it's not about we, it's about me. For us, historically, because it's been about we in the African American community and the brown community, the Latino and Latinx community, what you will see is that, to your point, when somebody does something out there, we have historically been blamed as all of us did it.
Sure.
In the community with Emmett Till, you mentioned, everybody grieved. When it came to Martin Luther King's assassination, he was everybody's pastor.
Exactly.
And when it even came to Malcolm X, he was everybody's uncle or relative. So now we have to be very, very careful with that, though. And I'm going to come back to your original question, but we have to be very, very careful with that, because there's this undercurrent right now in our community. There's an undercurrent in our community that really subscribes to this individualistic, I have to get it, capitalistic narrative that is so prone in this country. I have to get mine. That is promoted more than the family and the we and the us. So if I belong to that undercurrent in our community, then I could be very, very dangerous to Big Mama and them. I could be very, very dangerous to the sister or the brother who lives next door to me, because I'm not looking out for them. I'm looking out for myself. So again, circling back, Dr. G, to your question, can some European Americans or white people separate themselves from it, or from the officer who did it, or the officers who have stepped outside of the line, the blue line? Absolutely they can. Absolutely they can disassociate themselves, and they can have some level of sympathy, not empathy, but sympathy, as it pertains to, I'm sorry, because I'm connected to you, Dr. G. I see that you and your community are connected to this atrocity. So I'm sorry for you. And then continue on about their lives.
Right. And I think so many of the listeners of Black Like Me are white, and they're leaning in. They're listening from as far as Australia, Europe, and people are listening from like 115 countries, because they're really trying to understand through the lens of Black people, Black folks talking, like you and I talking, people are learning so much of this. And so I just want to say to the white listeners, sometimes people feel that if they've witnessed something like George Floyd's murder and they tweet about it or post about it, that somehow makes them a woke person. But until people begin to identify with the structural realities, I'm not saying I'm not trying to get somebody into counseling because they've identified with the officer so badly that, they become unhinged. But if they can only feel sympathy about what's happening to me and not identifying with the system or the person who represents that system that's perpetrating those crimes or those egregious events, they're really not helping the situation. So just seeing George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and not understand that what's consistent here are white people who are considered law-abiding, God-fearing, just standing their ground, just trying to be protective, that if we don't understand that there's a pattern here, they're not helping by just feeling sympathetic towards the loss of a Black life. They have to understand the white machinery, white supremacy, and this mentality, and also things that work within law enforcement, how that is over militaristic in their training. They have to really understand that just feeling badly for me is not enough, because the fact that they don't think that about their son and daughter gives them more headspace or energy space to dream, build businesses, go to school, buy homes, because they're not bringing that fear home. And from that day, Black people have not unseen that image. They have not unlearned that story, and they have not learned to unfeel that pain. And to be honest, I have not watched the 8 or 9 minutes of George Floyd's murder because I knew I couldn't unsee it. I knew what happened. I've seen stills and photos of it, but I have not watched it a single time, because from that day I said I can't, because if I do, I won't be able to go back. There's some things that I won't be, there's just things I'll be limited professionally. I'll be limited in some things. And so even the fact that I've got to shield myself so that I can be a person who reaches out to allies and who helps allies, that the fact that I've got to contextualize all of this and compartmentalize some of that pain, or watch what I watch or watch what I don't watch, I think that adds pressure, because I have these extra steps in my day.
Absolutely. You hit on something that was so profound, but as you're speaking, it's sort of stimulating so many different avenues to go down today.
Sure.
Before I go down the avenue that I had planned to go down, let me say this. While you didn't watch the video, I'm sure you were also impacted by hoodies. And
hoodies,
Dr. Bass, what are you talking about? Well, after, Trayvon Martin was killed, in our community, hoodie became the thing that you do not want your young person to wear.
Right.
Because it had a lasting effect. So one thing that's never talked about is the lasting effect of what happens with George Floyd. We now know that Skittles, iced tea, and hoodies are the ingredients to potential murder for our Black boys.
Yes.
So I know for my son, after that whole incident, I stopped him. I forbade him from wearing hoodies.
Wow.
Because of my own concern that something like that would befall him.
Yeah. Yes.
And speaking to other people around here, other fathers and mothers, the Black hoodie was now synonymous with my child being put in danger.
Exactly.
So there's some crumbs that we're going to have to talk about as it pertains to what happens after 2020. What happens if we don't get an opportunity to celebrate graduations and so forth. There's some crumbs. What happens to us looking at the screens for all these hours in a day, or not having the ability to leave our homes and trapped in a home where we historically had an opportunity to, live our lives outside of who we are in home. So it's so many things that we'll have to grapple with later. But let me say this one thing.
Sure, please.
As it pertains to our allies, I wrote a piece a couple of months ago where the question was asked, okay, Doc, talk about our allies. And I said, well, there's a difference between being aware and being conscious. Okay. Now, being aware suggests that you understand what's happening in your world, in your environment. Right. But when you talk about consciousness has two concepts associated with it.
Okay.
Being conscious means that you're aware about what's going on outside, but you're also internalized, meaning that you also understand what's going on in your own emotional and physiological processes. And those physiological processes may act or have you to act to change a particular situation.
Okay.
So there are so many people who can be aware and sympathize, with what's going on in the epidemic within this pandemic. So many can be aware of it, but it does not mean that you're conscious. It does not mean what we used to say back in the day, you're not woke.
Right.
You're not woke yet.
Right.
When you're woke, you're immediately transported to do something about that experience.
Exactly.
So what we saw 2020 was a good number of allies who marched, right alongside of us in places all around the world, and many of your listeners may have been, some of those who actually participated in the marches and the protests. But there was something that changed fundamentally when the news began to report it as just a quote unquote Black protest. They called those riots. But as soon as our allies jumped in, then it became an organized protest. So
a demonstration.
So we have to understand that this is just yet another example of the difference between being conscious and being woke or alert.
I'm sorry, I'm taking
aware.
I'm doing because I like what you're saying. I'm writing stuff down. No, man. Mm-hmm. That's a good word, because we have many people who are white and they're listening, and they're trying to figure out if they are aware or conscious. They're trying to figure out if they're really woke or not.
Yes. So let me say to your listeners who are white, thank you for your participation. Thank you, because from your participation, many of our Black sons and Black daughters didn't have to deal with what could have happened to them had you all not been present. And what I mean by that is the police officers in various cities around the country, and I say around the world, held back any punitive damage or any aggressive damage because you were there. True. So for your presence, I say thank you for in some way helping us to continue to move forward. However, if we are not consistently protesting, if we're not consistently trying to impact change, if we're not consistently doing something to help the community, then it was just a drop in the bucket.
You just dozing in and out. You're not woke. You just
dozing
in, right.
Picking and choosing.
Man, that's good. Man, I've got a couple more. I've got a few more questions, but what you mentioned, there were a couple of rabbit holes you were going to go down, and I didn't want to stop you. Were there others that you wanted other things you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I do. Yes. As it pertains to some of the young brothers, and I want to speak to the young Black men who are listening to your podcast, have an opportunity to have these experiences where you talk about it. Back in the day, we used to have these barbershop moments, when I had hair, the barbershop always served as a safe place for Black men to go and discuss politics and discuss what was going on societally. Yes. But we don't have those spaces as consistently as we used to. Now what we have to do is we have to create opportunities like this, where these young brothers have an opportunity to hear an older Black man talk about what they're experiencing from 2020 to 2021. I'll tell you, there's a lot of residual stress and strain that's going on with our young people right now.
Sure.
And one of the things that you asked me about earlier on was, what am I seeing as a therapist out here in the world?
Sure.
I'm seeing a lot of displaced hurt. I'm seeing a lot of displaced anger and frustration because of those.
It just means that it just redirected to someone who's not deserving of it.
Yes.
And how's that up, like in domestic violence or crimes or?
Well, we have to be very, very careful about these statistics that are constantly pouring out, because some people will say, you know what, the domestic violence rate is through the roof, but then when you really go into the numbers, I have yet to see, those numbers accurately represented.
Okay.
So we can assume that those numbers are going up based on what people are saying, and it just makes sense.
Right.
However, I need to see the data, because watch this. Just
Mhm.
because something is presented, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate. For example, the number of child abuse cases within the Black community has gone down significantly
Right.
since 2020.
Mhm.
But what do we know? Who were the major reporters? The major reporters were school teachers.
Right.
So even though it's presented like the rates have gone down, the rates could actually have increased. But the
Because
major
I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you
but
off.
the major reporters are no longer having the opportunity to report.
And the flip side of that, Dr. Bass, is we don't know the percentages, but many children report on abuse that's happening in the home. So not
Mhm.
only are they not in the places where it's reported, many of them, like we're not back in school here in Wisconsin.
Mhm.
So many of our children are in the very homes where abuse is taking place that is reported at school. So to report
Yes.
it going down is
Mhm.
so wrong, so inaccurate from where the net results could really be.
Right.
No, so I hear what you're
To
saying. You have to be careful with the statistics.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I,
So again, as it pertains to projection and displacement, what I've seen with a lot of clients that I'm currently working with, I've
Mhm.
seen a lot of just internalized anger, you
Wow.
know. So what happens with that is a lot of self-medication. Self-medication can come in many different forms. You know, some will have substance use and abuse.
Mhm.
Some will engage in relationships that they would not have engaged in before,
Sure.
distress. Some of them will find themselves eating or sleeping or having the symptoms of depression or clinical depression, more pronounced. So it's so many different ways that we self medicate. We
Mhm.
have to be careful how we do that. But yeah, man, I'm here in Georgia, and, still in Georgia, like many other places in the South, there's not a big promotion of mental health.
Mhm.
Mental illness is coming out in all of the songs that our youth are listening to.
Right.
And if you just take a second and listen to the lyrics of some of these songs, you'll begin to see that mental illness jump out there. But
Wow.
while they're talking about the mental illness and the symptoms of it, even those who are saying that they want to die, which, some of our recently deceased young rappers talked about before their demise.
So
You're not talking about a lot of help.
right.
You're not talking about a lot of help from professionals or even clergy.
Sure.
There's no backstory or comma information after the comma. It's like I'm hurting, I'm hurting, I'm hurting, but then you don't have anything else.
Nobody responds. No,
Nobody responds.
no one comes. Wow.
Yeah. So what happens, Dr. G, when you're screaming out in the world? What happens when you're screaming? There was an episode of This Is Us,
Hmm.
which is one of my shows. I love This Is Us.
I do too.
And the Randall character, he went to Louisiana, remember?
Sure.
And
Sure.
and as he went to Louisiana, he was introduced to his mother, in the spiritual realm.
Right.
And his mother had a practice that was taught down from her aunt to go into the river and scream.
Wow. Yes. Yes.
But what happens when we're out as a community screaming, but there is no solution?
Well, the police get called on you for one. That
Yeah.
could happen. We know this can happen because somebody's gonna say, "What the hell is that?"
Exactly.
Freaking, hey, no, I'm calling the police. Go off. Yeah. White guys are cute when they yell and they're drunk, but if we do it, it's a threat. You're right.
Absolutely.
This is Jesse Mopan, originally from Port Townsend, Washington, currently living in Madison, Wisconsin. I listen to Black Like Me because racism and white supremacy are very powerful forces at work in our society today, which I'll never understand through my own lived experience as a white person. I feel like it's important to support you so that you don't have to rely on corporate donors and you can stay true to your message. And I heard about you through word of mouth. Thanks and keep it up.
Now in its 5th season, the award-winning Black Like Me podcast has a reach throughout the U.S. and over 100 countries around the world. This amazing team of people here in Madison, Wisconsin are dedicated to changing the conversation surrounding race. When you sign up to support Black Like Me as a patron, you support the creation of better quality content and a better society. You help to plant the seeds for a different and better tomorrow. By going to patreon.com/blacklikeme and signing up at any of the levels offered, you are not only signing up to make a monthly donation, you are also joining a growing community of people interested in engaging the issue of race with a raw, unprecedented honesty. As a patron of the podcast, you will have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, and video chats with Dr. G. You will also have a chance to join the conversation that other patrons are already having with Dr. G about race in America. To become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/blacklikeme or see the link in our show notes. And for as little as $2 a month, you can support these important conversations and the work that Dr. G is doing.
Scream. You know, Chris, it makes me think back, like in last night I was watching Henry Louis Gates' Black Church special on People. It's really nicely done. And I love history, and particularly the history of the church, and oftentimes the history of the Black church has been left out. But he talked about when prayer was illegalized. And I actually wrote about this in one of my poems. It's called This Is Us. I mean, no, it's called, man, you got me thinking about this. Called You're the Ones. But in it, I talked about the ancestors who would pray underneath upside down kettles because they would trap the sound and not travel. But they would but in worship spaces, because it was so exuberant, and it was called bodily worship, because some of them, sort of like, church services we had, in Madison, when you were part of our church, we clap, we beat tambourines, we dance, we jump up, down and shout. I think that was a way of letting out some of the pressures of plantation realities, of Jim Crow realities, of Reconstruction realities. If we don't have places for doing that, whether in worship or in therapy, and if we're not getting outside and, woohoo, up on ski slopes or at, pools or beaches, that stuff is eating away at us. So one of the things I've got to remember is finding ways to go in the river in Yale.
Well, the great thing about the church, and you take me back there, it truly was and continues to be a fountain of life, because life goes so much further than just what we experience on the day-to-day. When I think about life, I'm thinking about looking to my left and looking to my right and knowing that even if I'm screaming, there's somebody who's screaming right next to me. So it normalizes my pain. It normalizes my experience. And then to be able to do that as a group, because remember what we talked about before, we are a collective people. We are more we in our worldview. So if we're all screaming, then it becomes a choir, right? And as we begin to scream and as it begins to sound rhythmic, then we have someone up in the front who serves as that ear, which was you. Wow. You became our Moses.
Wow, man.
Which is beautiful because you lead us to a place unlike what we came in with. Right. And what we need in our community are more Moseses or Moshus. We need more people who guide us to that next space.
That's true. See, now I see why you're the good doctor. I see why you get all those teaching awards, man. I see why you get all those awards. Listen, I'm watching the clock, and so I've got like 4 questions I'd love to ask you. But I appreciate the fact that that you've agreed to be a correspondent, because I just need to have you come back from time to time, because one, it's helpful to me, but it also helps people to understand what's going on. We have people who listen who are doctors, who are supervisors. They don't understand that when they talk about wanting diversity and why is it that sometimes we hire someone, they bring problems or they may come to work late. I'm not saying Black people always have home problems that mean we come to work late, but we're giving people a peek behind the curtain to understand the things that we're dealing with. Like I don't have time to get into this on the show, but just some poor treatment at a hospital concerning my mom last night. And it's not necessarily in the medical treatment, but just I'm her medical power of attorney, but to not listen to me, don't do that. Don't use that catheter. Don't go here. Don't. And then to tell me, well, we think she's looking okay. We ruled out stroke, and it's 10:30, and they want to send her home. 10:30 last night, and it's 0. And I said, well, no, my mama's not going home tonight. And I was then told, well, then we'll have to call an ambulance and then just send her back to her care facility. But you don't want that. I said, actually, I do. Call the ambulance. Send my mom out here tonight. Send a Black woman with dementia who's 81 years old with wind chill that's 10 below 0. I want you to do that. And it wasn't until I name dropped some of the higher ups that I knew at that hospital that allowed them to sort of stand down. But what I noticed is that I woke up madder, angrier than I was last night because one, I was able to use names and stuff to get her to stay. But then I started thinking, but the people in my congregation don't know any of those names. Their mama would have been in the ambulance. And so just understanding that because of my profile and because of who I know, I might get special treatment when pushed. But there's like this fuse inside me today. Like I canceled some of my meetings this morning because what happens is, and I'm going to go up to the hospital and see her after this and do work from there. But I feel like it's opened up other places of anger that I've not stopped to process. And so I have to also watch my response so that I'm not overly emotional in one situation, because I'm probably dealing with 3 situations that have just all come to a head right then. And so I want to say that as well, that to be present is sometimes hard, because it's like it's like the way pileups happen on the highway. If one car stops suddenly, then the second, third, fourth, fifth cars, it becomes this domino effect. And that's what it feels like emotionally. Like I'm thinking, why am I mad? And I'm not even thinking about something. I'm just thinking like I feel like I just want to cuss somebody out. Like I want to kick something. Like why am I feeling this way? And I'm like, oh yeah, my mama. Now she's someplace eating breakfast right now, French toast, being treated like a queen. She's out of it. She doesn't know what's going on. But I had to go to a place emotionally and professionally and drop names to not let these people think that they can threaten me by putting my mother in a hospital to show up at a facility where how's she gonna get back in there? They don't even know if she can walk. They have not seen my mother walk. She can walk, but they didn't know she came in on a stretcher. But all of that stuff then opens up, is this race related or not? I wasn't even thinking that it was a racist act, right? Then it was just my mama. But then I think it opens up all the other things that you didn't talk about, that you didn't, look at or didn't process. So I think one of the reasons why particularly brothers are afraid to talk is because it does open a door and a floodgate of unresolved anger. And my soul doesn't know how to measure it or meet it out. Like, all right, this is just 2020 anger. This is 2019. It's like my soul is saying, oh shit, the door is open. Let's just let it out. And so yeah, I feel like I'm mad right now for 1619. I'm mad for Kunta. Mm-hmm. I'm mad for Rosa Parks. Like I'm mad on so many levels today. And it is helping to talk through it. Even as I'm talking, I'm feeling better. But I'm realizing if it weren't for this interview, I wouldn't be talking about it. And in fact, as I canceled my day, I said, I'm not going to cancel Dr. Bass because I might need to. I might need to talk about what I'm feeling. Like I feel my blood pressure. I feel it. I feel it up. And things are going well. I think because now my guard is down, because the right authorities have called me. I've gotten a call from the president of the hospital, and people are looking into stuff and they're apologizing because they said that wasn't handled right. And so now my guard is down. So then I feel like other residual emotional effects are coming on me by letting my guard down. Then I start thinking about some of the work that I do through Nehemiah, where we are talking about the social determinants of health and racial battle fatigue and the kinds of microaggressions. The microaggression doesn't just mean somebody called me the N-word, but then now I'm getting mom stable. I'm then asking, would they have sent a white woman with dementia and 81 years old home, or a white man who's 81 with dementia? I start asking all these questions, and I begin to understand the oppressions and the aggression. I begin to think, all right, I need to get to a gym or to a therapy appointment or walk or something, because if I let all of this stay inside me, I'm not going to sleep well, I'm not going to eat well, and I'm going to displace it. I'm going to snap off on somebody who didn't need it, someone at the post office, someone at my office, my wife, my child. And so I didn't realize how compounded or compoundedly complex, or how complex this is compounded inside of me until you open the door and begin to talk about it. It's like, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. Man.
Well, you know what? You hit on something right there. You talked about anger, but understand that anger is just a secondary reaction to something, right? To a situation. But hurt is the primary.
Last night, Dr. Bass, I was hurt because I just thought, again, I'm sounding like a broken record a little bit, but how many older people have been sent out in the ambulance at 11 o'clock? And again, man, I know everybody's having weather in America, but when it starts being 15 below zero after dark and it's 11 p.m. and my mom goes to bed at 6:30.
Yes.
Like, how do you say that to a person? So really, I think I would know how to do with just straight up anger. But I was hurt to think you would think you could say that to me and I have no recourse. So it's not even just hurt like, would you do that to my mom? But also hurt because you think you could talk to me like that. And I'm supposed to say, okay, I'll take her. I'll take her home. Like, not even thinking that not even realize you don't know who I know. I know your boss's 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 boss. And I didn't even come in there like that, talking like that. I'm just sitting up there eating M&Ms, checking in on my mom. So yeah, man, it's the hurt behind it. If I'm mad, I can say my piece and be done with it. But I think when it's hurt and pain, it's like a chemical burn. You know, when there's a fire burn, you move your hand, but when it's a chemical burn, the damage is already done to the tissues. I feel like the damage has been done to the tissues, and I just feel off today.
Well, you know what they say, man. When you talk about stress, we can typically deal with stress. It's that compound stress.
Come on now.
That we typically struggle with, you know, and it's akin to Thanksgiving. You know, when you have a Thanksgiving Day plate, and if you're like me, I put a little bit of everything on the plate. Right?
I'm like you.
And what you do is you eat one thing at a time. But what happens when you try to eat all of it at the same time? You're going to get sick.
Yes.
So it's the same thing with dealing with trauma. We can't deal with everything on the plate at the same time. We have to compartmentalize it and eat one thing at a time. Otherwise, again, it will make you sick.
Wow.
So now listening to what you just described about your experience last night and looking at the hurt, you know, we have been, to quote the great Malcolm X, we've been lied to, we've been bamboozled, we've been all of those things because we have been taught that good things happen to good people.
Yes, we have.
And if you are consistently a good person or displaying good things or good behavior, then you expect that other people will respond in kind. Also, there's been this lie that we've been taught and fed that people do what they're supposed to do.
Yes.
People don't always do what they're supposed to do.
They don't always do that.
No, sending a woman home at that time of night, you know, with dementia.
Right.
I mean, it's textbook that you keep people as stable and as, you know, in the state place as possible. It just doesn't make sense.
No, you're right, man.
So,
but you know what?
Don't always do what they are supposed to do.
But I have to admit, talking about it, getting it out does make me feel better. You would think that it makes you mad, just like this is a grotesque example. But like, I hate to have upset stomach, but even more than upset stomach, I hate vomiting. I dread it. I think I'm gonna die every time I do it. But afterwards, it's like immediately you feel better because whatever your body's trying to regurgitate, it's gone. And so you're feeling better, but you still dread that moment. I almost have to give myself permission to do that. I know I'm going to feel better. I have to say, okay, Alex, you can't hold this back. Like, just let it go. Then it happens. This feels that way. I think the fear is, well, if I talk, I'm going to get mad. I might start crying. I might seem like I'm overly emotional. I don't open that door. But then when we do, it does help. So, you know, all of this is true. And you and I have to still show up and prove that we've earned the letters behind our name.
Yes.
You know, the doctor in front of our name. You still got to out teach everybody. I got to still out fundraise my white counterparts. I've got to still have the best staff. I got to still go to the hospital. I've got to still bury people's dead. I still got to do all of these things, but then come home and still process the kinds of trauma that can be triggered by an orderly, a resident, a nurse, a phlebotomist. While you're still trying to figure out if this is race related. And those things just converge on us, man.
Yes.
So our excellence and our resilience is way more than your standard excellence and resilience. Like, you shine, I shine, in spite of all of these other things that we do, man. You know, it makes me think about, like, one of my heroes in track and field was Edwin Moses.
Yes.
He ran the 400 lows. He could fly. But I was a 400 meter runner. That man could run over 13 hurdles. He could run a time that I couldn't in open 400, but I would always ask, how fast of a quarter miler could Edwin Moses be if he didn't have 13 hurdles? Like, he's still running like probably low 50s, 49s maybe. But what if you took those 13 hurdles away and just said, Edwin, just run an open quarter? He would have to be one of the fastest quarter milers on the U.S. Olympic team. And I feel like you and I and other Black men, our friend, Dr. Fussell, a urologist,
Yes,
down in Georgia, and others, so many of the professional Black men that we know, and Black women, like our wives, people are lauding us at the finish line, but we just ran the 400 lows.
yes.
We're winning with 13 freaking hurdles on the track. We never run without the hurdles because America never afforded us that opportunity. So if y'all think that what we're doing now is good in the 400 lows, imagine what we could do if there were no hurdles.
Wow.
And what our times would be. And so I feel like that's the piece that we're always up against. We know it's true. And even slowing down to tell people that is a reality is sometimes, shift to their paradigm. So, man, this is I recorded this for the audience, but this is helping me, bro.
Good.
Listen, if you got 2 more minutes,
Absolutely.
are there any new and I'll ask these so that you can ask, you can answer like with short answers if you like. Are there new diagnoses that are coming up because of COVID and the pressures of things like, are there new, I guess I just want to know, are there new diagnoses that have been created just because of the stress of the pandemic and what people have been witnessing on television?
Well, there are talks about creating new diagnoses.
Okay.
But they all fall up under the realm of anxiety disorders.
Okay.
So if of course, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual hadn't come up with its next edition yet.
Of course.
However, what we do know is that, there are folks who are experiencing some long-term impact of, like I said, the crumbs of this, past year. So yeah, there will definitely be some, but right now the discussion is centering around these anxiety disorders that are staying a little bit longer, than they used to.
Sure.
Another one that's jumping out there really, really good is the concept of agoraphobia. And agoraphobia is panic attack where you fear leaving your home. There's a fear of leaving your home. Yeah, agoraphobia. And typically it is associated with panic attack or panic disorder with agoraphobia.
So we're seeing more of that. We're going to be seeing more of that too.
We're going to definitely see more of that, especially as, we come with the vaccines and we start to get out of our homes a little bit more. The people who, remember we talked about this, Dr. G, about us being a community. But what if I begin to look at my community as the potential bullet that kills my life?
Right.
What happens to me and what I know of myself and my worldview if now my loved ones can kill me just by talking with me?
Right. The same community that brings us life is now
exactly
that life.
Exactly.
Wow. Next question. That's very helpful. How concentrated was the compounded anxiety in 2020? Let's just say if you just take like an average life of what you or I might experience just by microaggressions, being Black men in the world, between what we saw and what we felt. And I guess I know this is difficult to be quantifiably measurable, but like, was 2020 like 3 years of anxiety on average? Was it like 7 years? Like, what's the constant, like how concentrated was the anxiety in 2020?
Well, they say that different people experience anxiety and process anxiety the way that they do. But on average, there is a study out there, and forgive me, I'm blanking on the name of that author.
Sure.
But what they found is that, to your point, the events of 2020 on average caused more than 6 to 8 years of stress, of normal stress, all compounded within 1 year. Or actually compounded within about 8 to 12 months.
No, you're right.
So 8 to 12 months was the equivalent of 3 to 6 years of stress for a normal average person to experience. We all did it in 12 months.
That's deep. And then we certainly don't know the impact that the concentrated 6 to 8 years has on life expectancy. So that concentrated stress could mean the loss of 6 months, or if we believe in social determinants of health, or that racism is a social determinant of health. We don't know yet, but it could, the compound effect could be shortened life expectancy. So man,
absolutely. These are the crumbs that we sort of hinted on earlier. we're going to see some shifts in life expectancy, especially with our community.
Sure. And man, my last question is, how does anxiety work in a communal sense? What effect does white wokeness have on Black stress? I don't know if you can liken this to herd immunity, but what I'm curious, if I'm in a setting, if X amount of white folks really awaken and take on responsibility and sort of absorb the anxiety from the atmosphere, does it reduce it in me at all? That's an odd question. I don't know if I'm answering it right. I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, are there any positive emotional effects of more white people coming into consciousness, truly being woke? Does it somehow absorb or dissolve
Well, it does.
anxiety somehow?
I understand your question, and it's a very powerful question. The only way that I can answer it is this way.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the need to be heard.
Sure.
We also talked about the need not to put everyone's action on one or two people's actions, right?
Right.
So the more allies that we have who come in and avail themselves, then we begin to create the opportunity where it's not all white people who are bad.
Exactly.
Okay. Now we can say, okay, there's just this group. Maybe we'll call them the Proud Boys this week.
Sure.
Or maybe we'll call them Q, whatever this week. Or maybe we'll call them the Trumpers or whoever, but now we can begin.
Or emergency room doctors.
Or emergency room doctors. But what we're doing, Dr. G, is we're categorizing certain groups within a group, which is very beneficial to us long term. Because anxiety then becomes less when we see other white people versus lumping everybody into the same pot. And once we see a white person, then the anxiety shoots to the roof. Maybe this white officer will hurt me. Maybe this white ER physician is not going to be good for me, or all white people are bad. And what I wish would happen, Dr. G, is that many of the white people who have drunk the Kool-Aid of oppression would begin to look at that also. That it's not all Black people who fill in the blank. There's just one or two or three. There's very small populations or undercurrents of a particular group that do certain things. So as much as I promote and preach collectivism, I promote collectivism when it promotes health in life. Sure. When it comes to the opposite, I say, yeah, let's go ahead and compartmentalize people into their individual selves so that we can see the greater good of the greater community versus the specific ills of one small group of people.
Definitely. Listen, man, I know you got a busy day, and every time I talk to you, I appreciate your brilliance and your commitment to helping us understand ourselves and our communities and even those who are not like us, so that we move to a greater sense of collectiveness in unity. And I already appreciate it, but the more I talk to you, it resonates with me on such a deep level. And so I just want to let you know that I appreciate you, man.
Absolutely.
We'll be talking, more, in the future about things that are going on. But as I'm kicking off this season, talking about now what, I wanted to have a real on-air check-in, and this is just a brilliant way to have you on as my first guest in this new season. Since you've been on the show, we were named Wisconsin's favorite podcast.
Incredible.
Last year, great doors are opening up, and so I'm really appreciative of that. So listen, folks, you've been treated really well today. My guest has been Dr. Christopher K. Bass, 20-year veteran psychologist, associate professor, contributing professor, husband, dad, leader, thought leader. And it has been our pleasure to have him on Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. So Dr. Bass, go take on the world. Keep doing great things down there in Georgia. And I appreciate you, your work, and your friendship.
Thank you, my brother.
All right. Hey, you all. Didn't I tell you that today's episode was going to be fire? And you also heard Dr. Bass agreed to become a Black Like Me podcast correspondent. He's a psychologist, so he can't lie. He's got to do it. Listen, you all, I want you to lean into today's discussion, and you know the process. And if you're new to listening, you're going to learn the process. Don't just grab this good information while you're jogging or working out or driving and saying, this is sure good. Process it, share it with someone, retweet it, repost it. Let someone know how it has had an effect on you. And if you know a counselor or someone who needs counseling, share this with them as well. And as we say in each episode, we want you to lean in, we want you to learn, but be transformed. Don't just doze in and out. For those of you who are non-Black, particularly those who are white, your allyship means so much, but it ain't cheap. So it's not just saying, aha, I've listened, I'm an ally. What do you do with what you know? How does it change you? And how do you share it with those who could be changed also? For those of you who are patrons, thank you so much for your support. It means a lot to me. And for those of you who aren't, all you got to do is click the link below to find out how you can become a part of the Black Like Me podcast patron family. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm excited about season 5 and just continually asking the question, now what? Have a great day.
Black Like Me. Black.
This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Special shout out to Eli and to Jeremy, who are my engineers and my editors on this, to Don Thornton, who is my podcast manager, who makes sure that we line all of this up, to Corey Saffold, who is responsible for that exciting new jingle, that Black Like Me jingle. I'm so excited about that. And to vocals by Marcus Fleming.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.